Hi everyone, welcome to the American Academy of Religion and Society of Biblical Literature here in San Antonio, Texas. I am here with my good friend Daniel London. And
Yes.
hi, how are you?
Very good.
Good,
Wonderful
awesome.
to be here.
It's good to have you.
Wonderful to be here with you.
Yes, Daniel just did a talk on his paper on Johannine, I said it right? Johannine literature. And Daniel is such a good friend of mine that I slept through his talk. So I wanted to bring
Actually,
him.
I think I may have done an audio recording of it. So.
Oh, sweet. Well, we'll post that on the website.
Okay, yeah, I think it came out.
So I wanted to talk with Daniel about his talk on the Gospel of John, because John is such a foundational text for Girard and mimetic theory.
Yeah, and Christian spirituality in general.
Yeah. So Girard often talks about the Gospel of John, chapter 1, as being the foundation for patterns that happen throughout the Gospel. So
Right.
he'll say, John, chapter 1 says, the light came into the world, and the world knew it not. The world kicked it out, excluded it. And you get this pattern happening throughout John's Gospel. And you specifically look at John chapter 9.
John 9 and 10, yes.
9 and 10.
Where the light image comes out.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, and also in John 1, it talks about the light came into the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it, did not overwhelm it. So that's an image that I look at quite a lot in John 9, where Jesus identifies as the light of the world. But he does it in a way that's somewhat enigmatic, and it's in response to the question of suffering as asked by the disciples when they see suffering in a man born blind. And they ask the question in a way that's driven by the compulsion to blame. Who do we blame for this suffering? Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Basically.
Very human question. I mean, we always want explanations to the suffering
Exactly.
that goes around. And the explanation often comes in, who are we going to blame?
Yes, and often blaming the victim. And Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned that he was born blind. Don't go there. But coming is, well, he says, as long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Coming is the night in which no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So actually my paper this morning was mostly looking at this really strange saying. Jesus says, okay, we have to do the work while it's day. Night's coming when no one can work. But I'm the light of the world. So that somewhat makes those first two statements incoherent. So I was comparing those first two statements with a saying of Rabbi Tarfon, who also says there's limited time during the day, we got work to do.
Now, Rabbi Tarfon is a first century.
So it's interesting, Rabbi Tarfon was probably more like second century.
Okay.
So I made it clear that when we're talking about trying to get to the historical Jesus, there's no way the historical Jesus would have been quoting Rabbi Tarfon,
Right, yeah.
because Tarfon lived several years after Jesus died. But it's possible that the historical Jesus may have been uttering a proverb that was sort of a proto-saying of Rabbi Tarfon's.
Oral culture, these things are probably
Exactly.
in the air for a long time.
Or to use the sort of literary terms that I used in my dissertation, is the implied author cueing the implied reader for an intertext that's similar to like an older saying of Rabbi Tarfon.
Okay.
So he creates this dichotomy of day and night, and then he says, I am the light of the world, which is just very confusing. Bultmann, Dodd, and many other Johannine commentators are very confused by what Jesus is talking about, and most of their explanations I find unsatisfactory.
Bultmann is so unsatisfactory.
Well, especially he sort of just moves everything around.
Yeah.
Diachronic reading. He says, well, that was from this part of the chapter, we'll just move that over here. But if you're committed to a synchronic reading it throughout as one continuous narrative, then you have to wrestle with the complexity of it. And I particularly want to wrestle with the complexity of it because it's Jesus' initial response to this question of suffering. He says, stop blaming. Now let me expand by using these images.
So what is he doing with these images?
Yeah,
Day
so-
and night,
yeah.
suffering. I mean, these are questions that we're always asking. What is
Right,
the,
right.
What is the deal with suffering?
Yeah, exactly.
What's he doing
So
with
why is he
day
bringing
and
up
night?
day and night in
Right,
response
yeah.
to suffering? So it's popular to talk about riddles in Johannine scholarship right now. So I talked about this as a riddle. I first explored the possibility of Rabbi Tarfon saying as a riddle, which some people say it is, but that's not convincing. But I do suggest that Jesus' readaptation, re-rendering of the saying of Rabbi Tarfon is riddle-like, and it's a specific type of riddle that's akin to what one scholar calls the monk's question, which is really like an insider's riddle. It's a riddle that requires inside information, usually regarding some religious facts and tenets. So the inside knowledge that the riddle expects the Ridley or the audience to know is, I argue, the symbols and meaning associated with the Second Temple Jewish celebration of Sukkot, in which day, night, light imagery just is all over, especially water and light.
Now, what is Sukkot?
So Sukkot is it's Hebrew for tabernacles or booths,
Okay.
And it's a holiday prescribed in the Torah, but in the Second Temple it had a particular expression, and they had a wonderful water procession ceremony, which I don't think I mentioned to you when we were talking earlier. It's quite similar. I was just at Standing Rock, North Dakota. The clergy were called to stand in solidarity with the water protectors, and every day they do this beautiful water ceremony directed by the women, and men are invited to participate as sort of secondary participants. And I was reminded of that while I was revisiting this beautiful Second Temple Jewish celebration of Sukkot, in which water is drawn by the priests from the pool of Siloam, which is the same pool in which the man born blind was told to go wash and be healed. They draw water from the pool, process through Jerusalem with people playing music and dancing and blasting shofars, and they go into the court of women, which has 4 huge candelabra and men holding torches, and they pour the water into this huge jar with spouts that drench the temple altar. And scholars imagine, and this is attested to in the Mishnah, that the water was sort of magnified and reflected. The light was magnified and reflected by the pouring water. And I'm just imagine it now. It's a really beautiful image, especially at night. Like, this was a way to enhance light. And they did this for 7 days, and they did it throughout the night. And so scholars agree that this was a way of enacting a prophecy of Zechariah, where Zechariah talks about the Feast of Sukkot, Feast of Booths, and says, there will be no day and no night. There will be one continuous day, one continuous light. And that light is God. God is the source of that light. So Jesus says something that doesn't make sense to someone who's not familiar with that ceremony. If you know that ceremony, you say, okay, well, Jesus is identifying as the light of Sukkot.
And the connection is that Jesus tells the blind man to go to the waters of
That too, yeah. Right.
Siloam
Siloam, yeah. And again, I think that's
to be healed.
to be healed.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, the 3 core symbols in Gospel of John are water, bread, and light. And yeah, water and light are all over Sukkot. And I think in many Johannine scholars, actually that has been a big debate at the conference this year, was who is the audience? Is it a Gentile audience? Is it a Jewish audience? But to get hints like that, and the fact that he was sent to Siloam, which the narrator says, well, that means the sent one. But somebody else who's familiar with that water ceremony would say, well, that's also the pool in which the priests draw the water. So that helps me understand what Jesus is talking about when he says the day, the night, and the light. But that was sort of the first half of my paper, and then the second half, which I think is more maybe practical, maybe applicable, maybe pastoral, is how does this function as a response to this question of suffering? I mean, that's really fascinating about the ceremony, and okay, it's this inside riddle, but what does that say about Jesus' response, or God's response to the question of suffering, especially when driven by the compulsion of blame? And that's when I bring in mimetic theory and interpret the symbols day and night, and I'm very conscientious of the fact that I am bringing this mimetic theory lens to the text. Day, I'm arguing, is the innocence of the victim, or it's the revelation of the victim's innocence, whereas night is being blinded by a lens that is driven by the compulsion to blame. And the light reveals the innocence of the victim, exposes the falsehood and even the guilt of the accuser, but instead of just inverting that process and scapegoating the scapegoaters, it says, okay, you scapegoaters, look at what you're doing. Stop doing that, but I'm not going to scapegoat you. I'm not going to respond with violence to you. I'm going to transform you just as the light transforms, gives a different quality and character to both the day and the night. And that, I follow that throughout the whole pericope with vision blindness being transformed by the judge, and then the wolf and the sheep being transformed by the shepherd.
Oh, that is really helpful, because the image that comes to my mind is that when we are caught up in the scapegoat mechanism and we want explanations and we want to get them through accusing someone or blaming someone, we're living in the darkness.
Exactly.
And
yes.
when you have light shined upon you, it hurts.
Oh yes, exactly.
You want to go like this because the light, it's too light.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And
right.
so this is what people often interpret as the wrath of God.
Yes.
It
yes.
feels
yes.
like violence
Right.
to you.
Well, and that's
When you have your scapegoating mechanism, when you participate in scapegoating and that trait gets brought to you.
Absolutely, and that's why light is associated with judgment all throughout John. Every time light comes up, it's judgment, because it feels like a judgment. It's painful. Whoa, I am the violent victimizer? Oh man, that's disturbing, because I was finding comfort and consolation and meaning in life and righteous anger in life by blaming these other people. But every time I'm doing this, I mean, it's cliche, but this idea that every time you point, you're pointing three fingers at yourself, and to realize, oh wow, I am the guilty violent one, is hard. But Jesus doesn't just say that and then say, yeah, you're bad and you should suffer and die. He says, okay, I want to keep engaging with you, and I want to talk about what this compulsion to blame is about, and where are some other ways you can direct that.
You know, the hope is the disciples, because the disciples get it wrong
Yes,
over
exactly,
and over and
right.
over. They abandon Jesus. They see that Peter accuses Jesus. They see that they get caught up in the scapegoat mechanism, and Jesus does not give up on them.
Yes.
He comes back in the resurrection and offers
Exactly.
them peace and
Exactly.
another chance and another chance.
Exactly, and what I like to do with John is try to identify with those whom we don't want to identify with, including the disciples. And a lot of commentators say that their question is, one commentator says it's a stupid question, and in some ways it is, and yet it's also a real question that a lot of us have. Who can I blame?
It's a very human question.
And identifying with the disciples allows me to experience Jesus' response, and also in John, as somebody who has Jewish background and is drawn to Judaism and Jewish literature, I want to identify with the hoi Judaioi, the Jews in John. And what does the gospel do to me if I do that? And it's true that Jesus, when he comes back from the dead, he does not necessarily engage with his oppressors. But, and this is going outside of John, but when it comes to another oppressor, Paul, Jesus does appear to him as Paul's on his way to victimize. Jesus appears as the victim and says, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you persecuting me?" So, and then in Luke, while he's being crucified, Father, forgive them; they know not what they do. So, ultimately, I'm seeing the gospel as an invitation, or at least a space in which I can bring my own compulsion to blame, my own wolves that are violent, and unleash my own violence. I don't necessarily consider myself a violent person.
You're a very peaceful person. Yes.
That's because I just give it all to Jesus.
Right, that's good.
But there's something about that. Like, I do get frustrated with inexplicable suffering, natural suffering. Who do I blame for this? These acts of God. Well, I'm going to direct it towards God, and God in Christ receives it, not to affirm it, but to transform us, to bring us out of blame through forgiveness. And it's a continual process. And I think, and Allison has, of course, done amazing work with how the Eucharist works on us. And sort of weeding out the violence gradually. It's not one thing that happens overnight.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much.
Yeah,
for this
thank you.
conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was fantastic. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Adam.